One of my favorite times of the week, this week in Media Screwups, with our friend Katie Halper of The Katie Halper Show and co-host of the Useful Idiots podcast. It's good to see you, Katie, and you've got a real doozy for us this week.
Yeah, it's incredible. Good to see you, too.
Yeah. All right, let's take a look at this. You found a bunch of these clips about Afghanistan from MSNBC and Fox News, which just goes to show how much manufacturing consent is currently happening in the media. Yeah. Let's take a listen to all of them.
Do you fear the same thing could happen in Afghanistan with the U.S. presence leaving, that we could have a vacuum, and in that vacuum, we could see terrible things grow out of that vacuum?
I'll be surprised if it doesn't happen that way. I mean, I was just there in January. The Taliban are already in the capital. I mean, they're occupying neighborhoods inside Kabul, so they are already inside the gates. It's easy to say, yeah, we failed, we haven't accomplished anything, but that just isn't true. And particularly with regard to women, they're everywhere. They're in the parliament. They're doctors. They're PhDs. It's transformed the society, and I think it's the women who are more worried than anyone else. Yeah. You mentioned 2011 at the top there. And that was, of course, when President Obama decided to go to zero in Iraq. And it was, they're very different countries, very different. But that's what I'm worried about. If you remember there, we went to zero, we pulled out, we came home. And then within 3 years, we had ISIS taking over, a third of Iraq. And I hope that doesn't happen here in Afghanistan.
We did not build up the kind of Afghan army and police or other institutions that could withstand the return of the Taliban. So the problem really began in the Bush administration. President Obama tried to respond with a big surge after the surge had worked in Iraq, but it didn't work as well in Afghanistan. And ever since then, we've been essentially going for sort of a semi-success, or at least, mitigating our losses. But let's face it, there has not been another big attack on America since 9/11 emanating from that part of the world. And that has to count for something.
Pretty amazing, Katie, because what they don't get is that it also doesn't count. What also counts for something are the people who are dead, Afghans and Americans, and the dozens of people that we lose a year, the billions of dollars that were spent, and just the general knock to American prestige on the world stage. I just found these clips so ridiculous. And all of those people I've known, I've tracked them for years in terms of the debates. What they're saying has not changed in the last decade since I started following this.
Yeah, it's really amazing. And first of all, I love that guy's name is Dexter. It's so perfect. I just can't help but think of that serial killer. But there are even parts of that exchange that are worse than what's there. And there's so much to track. We, of course, couldn't show the whole clip. And by the way, shout out to Case Study QB, who's the person who found those clips. But
very good.
It's insane. Joe Scarborough is giving them such curated questions. At the beginning of this, he gives a spiel. He gives a whole monologue. And he's like, is that right? And they're like, yes, that's right. It's so coached and it's so obvious. And they're basically admitting that they're not winning and they're changing the goalposts. And also they're talking about ISIS and what created ISIS. It was the U.S. in Iraq that it was the war in Iraq that created ISIS.
Yes.
So there's always this historical amnesia and they never give the context. And what is the point? What is the end game? You have Scarborough later on in that clip basically saying well, we're not going to win, but that's not what this is about. That's not what victory is going to look at. And then he goes into Syria and how we're not going to win there, but we can still pressure Assad and the Russians and Iran. And it's just this part of this great, this whole agenda that they're not being honest about. It's not about saving lives there. It's not about protecting people there. And the women, how much better is it there than it was 20 years ago? I mean, there are more educational opportunities, but there's also more droning, bombing, terrorism. Not to whitewash the Taliban, but this isn't how they're going to be defeated. That's what we know from history.
Well, we already know that. Look, it's been 20 years. You can't do it. It's not going to happen. And maybe that's a sad thing to say, but it's unless you're willing to occupy the country, which is its own whole problem, and basically enforce, our will on all Afghanistan, which we even kind of tried and it didn't really work, then what are you going to do? And what I find most troubling about this, I've been reading Dexter Filkins for a long time. He's still one of the best war correspondents in the game. But part of the problem is they get attached to the conflict itself and then start out and be like, well, you don't understand. And it's like, well, maybe the American people understand much better than you do, which is that, look, yeah, nobody's saying what's been done is bad. In terms of like spending on women in Afghanistan. But maybe it's not worth it anymore. And there's just enough to be said for that.
No, I think that's a really good point. I think there is a kind of like, there's a lack of distance for these people. They have to justify that it's happened, right? And like the longer they stay in, the more hope there is that something good will happen. And of course, the worse it's getting. But I think that's a really good point, that they don't have the perspective on this. And that for them, it would be like, they also, I think, don't want to kind of admit to the failure. That would require admitting that they got some stuff wrong.
Yeah, I mean, Michael O'Hanlon, the second guy he played there, I mean, he was instrumental in 06, 07 in the Bush surge strategy, just so people get to understand where some of these people come from. And it's like, the same arguments in 2006, it's been 15 years. Does it really still, and does it still take her hand? It's like you said, I mean, what bothers me the most about Joe and all these people is that it is completely disconnected from modern politics. And at the end of the day, like, democracy is supposed to have some say in how our presence abroad is conducted.
Right, that's the irony, right? That's the irony, right? Because this is all about spreading democracy. And of course, the way it's being done here isn't very democratic. They're ignoring the popular will of the people who don't want to be fighting these endless wars. And what's amazing also about these clips is that, like, they're not even denying that they're going to be endless. They're not even pretending that that's not true. They're saying it's okay. Like, well, what else are we going to do? And what's amazing is that there are soldiers in Afghanistan who weren't born at the beginning of the war. Yeah. That's just so striking and stunning. And really, like, what is the game plan? Like, what is the game plan? I don't see it.
One of the seminal moments, for me, in turning against this was when I had to write the obituary of somebody, and I was 25, or maybe 24, when I had to write the obituary of somebody who was younger than me, who had just been killed in Afghanistan. And I was like, you know what? Enough. Okay, guys, really appreciate it. Thank you, Katie. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate it. We'll have more Rising for everybody right after this.